Hello and welcome to the Curious Life podcast. My name is Yana Firestone. Today I'm joined by former publishing powerhouse and design expert, Mr. Neale Whitaker. Neale, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Yana, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Am I near enough to the mic?
Yeah, why don't you maybe wriggle in just a little bit,
Wriggle
just
a little bit closer.
Case. Yes,
Okay.
Excellent.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, I was really looking forward to this interview. I know I got in touch a while ago because I think you not only, have this huge media presence and everybody knows who you are and you're doing wonderful things on television, which we'll get to. You've had this really long and interesting career, but because of my background as a therapist, I'm always interested in the things that get people to where they are. What are the things we've overcome? What are the things that, might have been challenging or fabulous or things that have kind of led us to where we are today? So the backstory is kind of my lane. So, in terms of your story, you started off a long, long way away from this beautiful hotel here in Sydney. In fact, almost the other side of the world.
Absolutely, on the other side of the world.
Yeah. So
in the UK.
In the UK. So can you tell us a little bit about growing up in the UK and what that life was like for you?
Oh gosh, yes. Where do I start? Look, I was born in the 60s. I was born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s, came of age in the 80s. And that all happened in the UK. Yeah, I was born just outside London, in what was the county of Kent back in the 60s when I was born. But these days it's kind of southeast London because London has sprawled out and out and out. So I was born in a place called Rochester, which is, sort of about 20 miles from the centre of London. But when I was about 5 years old, my parents moved to the coast. So I actually grew up on the south coast of England in a place called Margate, which has subsequently become quite famous because it's also the birthplace of Tracy Emin, the artist, who's the same vintage as me. More of that later. But as Tracy's fame has grown, then so has Margate, because she's a Margate girl. In fact, I think she lives back there now, and she even gave Margate an art gallery, Turner Contemporary, several years ago. So that's where I grew up. And went to school in a place called Ramsgate. Look, I can't say anything bad about my childhood or upbringing. I think it was a very ordinary childhood, ordinary upbringing, whatever that means. I guess the only thing that was extraordinary about it is that my father passed away when I was only 14 years old.
Wow.
And so I guess that was a very sort of unusual and unforeseen drama, not just in my life, but in the life of my siblings and my family. But in terms of my schooling, my education, the sort of cultural background, it was all, to me, pretty ordinary late 60s, early 70s English stuff.
Well, you could say that that's quite lucky then. If there aren't any major things you have to complain about your childhood, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Look, I was never a great sportsman, and I went to an all-boys grammar school where there was a huge emphasis placed on sport. So I always felt a little bit kind of at the back of the line when it came to all that kind of stuff. But I think I compensated in other ways, because I sort of worked out that if I was going to make my mark in that kind of environment, it had to be academically, intellectually. So I think I was a pretty damn good scholar, pretty damn good pupil. And I kind of rose through the ranks that way and made my mark, because I could not make my mark on the playing field, on the sports field. That was never going to happen. Yeah. But I wanted to make my mark. I've always had, I guess, a sort of competitive side to me. I want to be challenged. I want to succeed. And I think I probably worked out at an early age that it was only going to be through my brain power, if you like, or my communication skills that I was ever going to make that mark.
Well, luckily for us that you had that drive. I just want to kind of circle back a tiny bit. You mentioned that you lost your dad at 14, and that is such a tender age and such a time in a kid's life of development and so much going on as you're kind of moving into your independence and I guess, around 14, 15, you're really kind of breaking away from your identity as a kid in the family and more so of a young person at large. Did losing your dad have much of an impact, do you think, on your development? I mean, what was that like at such a young age?
Look, honest answer is it probably made me old overnight. I think I grew up very, very quickly. One minute I was 14 and the next minute I was 24.
Yeah.
Because I think something like that does age is the wrong word, matures you, because you're suddenly dealing with emotional stuff that you've never had to deal with before and that other kids are not dealing with at the same time or at the same rate. Yeah. Look, I have to, I guess, I have to be quite frank with you. I didn't have a close relationship with my father. We were never particularly close. So the kind of emotional scar, the emotional hurt was perhaps not as great as it might have been had we been very close. I think for me the emotional hurt was more about seeing the impact that his passing had on my brothers and my mother, who were closer to him than I was. But certainly, it was a cataclysmic event to happen in the life of an adolescent, and in the life of my brothers too, because I have one brother who's 4 years younger than me, so he was only 10 years old. Wow. And then I have another brother who's 4 years older, so he was 18. So we were all pretty young to lose a parent, regardless of the relationship with that parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it changes the entire dynamic of the family.
Yes, it does.
And then your relationship with your mum as well, because you're probably seeing her in a much more vulnerable state.
Oh, look, she was pretty important in my life before the passing of my father, but when my father had died, she became obviously the sort of the pivot around which our lives revolved. And she wasn't old herself. I mean, gosh, she was. If my father was only 43 years of age when he passed away, I think that means my mother was probably about 41.
Wow.
So we're talking young people.
People. Yeah.
Especially by today's standards. And I think my mother did the most amazing job, bringing up three sons.
Tough job.
On her own, and and she did it.
Wow.
And to be quite honest, I don't think I ever heard her complain.
Really?
She would have had her private moments, definitely, when she was probably despairing, but we never heard it.
Wow.
She did a damn good job.
Superwoman. I think my kids hear me complain on the daily. So there's something to take from that, because these are the things that you cherish and these are the things that you remember, and how magical that she spared you.
Yes.
All of that.
Yeah.
So I guess things were changing. You were driving yourself forward in an academic sense, and I did hear that you'd always kind of had in mind that you might end up in drama school. And so what happened there?
Look, I think I did have ambitions when I was young. I thought I was going to end up as an actor, but it wasn't to be. Look, when I was at school, I used to love taking part in school plays and all that kind of stuff. Although I don't remember ever having sort of lead roles in particular. I was always a bit of a support act.
Important, nonetheless.
Bit player. And then when I went to university, I did a bit more acting as well. And it was definitely something that interested me. But I don't think I had the necessary fire in my belly, which, maybe I wouldn't have had the talent either, I don't know, I never got that far. But I think at that sort of young age, it's the passion, it's the determination to succeed at all costs. I think it's got to be like the only thing in the entire world that you want. You've got to want it more than anything. And I just didn't have that. So I never pursued it beyond uni. I had every intention of going to drama school, but it actually never happened. My life took a different path.
Sure did. So you talk about, coming of age in the 80s.
Yep.
And I was born at the very beginning of the 80s, so I had an early childhood in the 80s, so I have a taste of that time. But I can only imagine what it must have been like as a young person really getting to enjoy the 80s. What were the standout moments for you? Can you think of times culturally or personally that the 80s were really...
The 80s was it was an interesting time. I mean, I was 18 in 1980, so you know I was sort of coming of age and entering adulthood just as the 80s began. I went to university in 1980, so the first 3 years of that decade were at uni. I mean, looking back on it, I mean it's interesting because of course when you're living through an era, you don't really analyse it.
Yeah.
In the same way that history does.
True.
You know, just as we won't we don't analyse the decade we're living in now, but history will obviously do that for us down the track. I mean, the 80s in the UK was a difficult time in many ways because it was the years of the Thatcher government. You know, we had a very repressive right-wing government. There was an awful lot of industrial unrest. An awful lot of political unrest generally, a lot of very unhappy people, a lot of striking, a lot of industrial action. What that did, I think, was created an atmosphere of great creativity. There was a lot of underground creativity. It was a fantastic era for music, for the arts. Everything flourished, probably as a result of that awfully repressive government that we were all living under. So, you know, it was a great time to go to uni, to then move to London, to be following bands, following fashion. It was exciting. It was a pretty special time. I mean, I look back on the 80s with a great degree of affection, even though I'm not sure at the time I was really enjoying myself, because I think I had a lot of anxiety and angst about life in general at that time.
Yeah.
I wish I'd enjoyed it more, basically, but that's the beauty of hindsight.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I dread to think what we're going to look back on this decade and see, apart from duck lips and lots of fillers, and I don't know what else really is going to mark this era.
Well, as I said, history will decide that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, is the anxiety and the angst that you had at that time something that, again, you were aware of at the time, or something that you can look back now and think, gee, that was a tough time, and at the time you were just kind of muddling through?
Look, I don't know. It's hindsight is a wonderful thing. I think probably I was aware of it because I think I just admitted that I didn't enjoy life as much as I should have done at that young age. And you know that question about what would you have said to your young self?
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going to ask me that, I would probably have said to my young self at the age of 18, just for God's sake, chill out, relax, you know? Let life unfold. Don't be so anxious. I was anxious about my sexuality. It was you know, a time when I was sort of coming out as a gay man, and you know they were different times. I mean, this was as part of 40 years ago. Yeah. Things were different. I was also, I think, probably worried about my career, where that was going to go, what I was going to do with my life. There was a lot of anxiety there. A lot of anxiety there.
Did you have a lot of support around you? I mean, you talk about, you know, starting to become aware of who you are and how to express that to the world. And was it something, I know it was a very different time, but was your sexuality something that you were able to talk about with people, family, friends?
If I'm honest, no, not really. I mean, I had a group of very close friends, and I'm happy to say that you know, some of them are still very close friends to this day, even though we live on opposite sides of the world. But Jana, these were different times. You didn't talk about your sexuality. That was, and don't forget this with the UK too, where we didn't talk about anything private or anything personal. It wasn't done.
Stiff upper lip and all that.
Absolutely, stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
You just didn't talk about that stuff. It was different to today, where we do talk about that stuff, where we kind of wear it on our sleeve.
Yeah.
You just didn't do it. You didn't go there. You just got on with it, and you worked stuff out for yourself. But there was an awful lot of anxiety at that time too, because of course it was the era of AIDS.
Yeah.
You know, so my coming out as a gay man, and I have to say, you know, there was no great coming out moment.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. It was just a sort of gradual, slow process that happened over a period of probably a couple of years, where people just suddenly sort of drew their own conclusions. You know, there was never any time when I stood up on a soapbox and said, yes, I'm gay.
Yeah.
Never happened.
Yeah.
I wish I had a great coming out story to
Yeah.
tell you, but I don't.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm very fortunate that coinciding with that period in my life was this growing awareness of AIDS. And I'm just so grateful that I became aware of it when I did, because a lot of people my age, a lot of my contemporaries are no longer with us.
Yeah.
But fortunately I became aware of that, but then of course that also instilled a great deal of fear.
Yeah.
That, you know, something to do with your sexuality has this association with death and disease, and it can all get a bit mixed up in your head.
Absolutely.
Especially at that young age.
Absolutely, and I can only imagine how conflicting that would be. And I remember, I don't know if you had the same kinds of ads on television.
The Grim Reaper.
Yeah,
we did.
I mean, it was absolute fear-mongering. And yes, there were, at that, when nobody really understood the disease and what was going on, yes, it was very scary.
Yeah.
But
this was sort of, when would this have been? This wasn't sort of 1980, this would have been several years later, I think probably sort of 83, 84, 85, that kind of time was when the Grim Reaper campaign. But certainly at that time, you know, that it did instill a great deal of fear amongst the population in general.
Yeah.
So that was another reason why you didn't go around discussing your sexuality, because people just did not want to know at that time.
Yeah,
At that time.
I just, you know, feel terrible for the number of people that probably didn't make it through, and I don't mean, you know, physically, but mentally, having to contain such complex feelings about yourself. I mean, it's brilliant that we finally come to an age where people do talk about everything, and I actually was saying to someone the other day, I actually think it's kind of gross that anyone who has any kind of non, you know, heterosexual preference, let's just say, has to come out. Like, why? I don't have to go and announce to everyone, okay, I'm ready to sleep with a boy.
No.
You know, I don't have to tell my parents, guess what, I'm straight. You know, so
But like I just said, you know, there was no great coming out. I mean, that has become very much a part of gay culture now.
Yes.
This sort of coming out moment. And you know, it's absolutely not a bad thing at all. I'm not saying that for one second. But certainly, you know, becoming aware of my sexuality as a young man in the early 1980s, it was a very different culture, and you just kind of got on with it. And you know, your friends and your family started to sort of draw their own conclusions.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds almost comical, but you know, there's that point when your elderly relatives sort of are talking about you playing the field and haven't quite met the right woman yet, you know, and then all of a sudden it's, no, I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Right.
And, how's your friend, kind of thing. And you know, you look back on it, and I guess there is a comical side to it as well. But it was just a slow process of allowing it to dawn on people. I mean, maybe it was cowardly, maybe it would have been better if I'd sat down and said to my family, look, this is the way it is, I'm gay, but I don't think the outcome would have been any different.
Yeah.
I think allowing them to just draw their own conclusions and accept it was probably the way to go at that time.
Yeah. And were you, when it kind of dawned on them, do you think, was it sort of okay? Were you embraced?
Embraced, no. Was it okay? Yes.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm very, very fortunate, Jana, that my sexuality has never been a problem with my family, my friends, my colleagues. It really hasn't. I mean, I have two wonderfully supportive brothers who both live in the UK, and you know, David, my partner, and I are, albeit extended, because we're in Australia, we're extended family, but we're very much part of their family. And no, it couldn't be less of an issue. My mother was, a little, I mean, she was also a creature of her time. You know, she took a little bit longer to get used to the idea. But, I mean, sadly, she's no longer with us either. She passed away about 20 years ago. But, you know, by the end of her life, she certainly had totally accepted it and come to terms with it.
Yeah.
So, it was never a real problem.
That's great. Again, it's, you know, things have kind of tracked along nicely for you over the years, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend that everything in my life has been plain sailing. Of course, like everyone, I've had massive ups and downs over my 50 plus years.
Yeah.
But it's sort of fair to say that that side of my life, the sort of the sexuality side of my life, has been reasonably smooth.
Fantastic. And maybe that's nice for people to hear, because you know, we do hear the stories of the very difficult families and the very difficult, I guess, finding pathways to acceptance that have been challenging, and you know, maybe it's nice to hear that it can just be okay.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a big
It
deal.
absolutely can be okay.
Yeah.
It absolutely can be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I would urge anyone listening to this, who if they're going through that kind of sort of dilemma at an early age, is to just find the courage to be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself and tell the world, yeah, this is who I am.
Yeah.
Because once you do that, you will feel so much happier.
Absolutely. And there's so much more support available now, and I work with young people, as I was talking with you about off air, and you know, the number of kids who would have been so isolated because they just aren't aware that other people exist like them. I'm talking about trans kids and gay kids and kids that maybe have families that are just not very open to other ways of being. And the fact that they can just jump on their computer and find entire flourishing communities of people just like them, I think has been the greatest gift that the internet has given.
I mean, that's a very interesting point you're making, because of course for me it was university, because I was a student long before the internet existed.
Yes.
You know, we're talking about sort of 1980 to 83, and that was where I met my tribe. I mean, I think you know, going to university made my life a lot easier and gave me the courage to accept my sexuality and share it with other people. You know, I came from a fairly sort of traditional repressive boys' grammar school in England, where certainly it was a very different culture. And you know, I have to confess that you know, I did feel isolated at school, because it was a very private culture. It was a very masculine, very macho, sports-dominated culture that I wasn't particularly comfortable in. Then I went to university and studied an arts degree, and I suddenly realised that there were people like me. And all of a sudden, in that university environment, you can choose your friends. You can choose like-minded individuals. And suddenly I had this group of male and female friends who were cut from completely different cloth to anyone I'd ever met before. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. You know, I found my tribe, and I'm very fortunate to say I've kind of stuck with my tribe throughout my life. Wow. But it was at uni that I found them.
That's so important. And that's a great message to any young people listening, because often you don't find your tribe at school, and you've only got a very select group of people to pick from, and then once you leave school, the whole world opens up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's exciting.
Yeah.
And validating at the same time.
Yeah. So you had this incredible kind of, I guess, almost a coming of age, where you've found your people, you're feeling like you're getting comfortable in your own skin, and then you start having this really creative career. You've done so many things, but I understand you were working as a stylist, is that right, in the beginning?
No, in the beginning I worked in public relations.
Right.
So my first job was working for a very high-profile PR agency in the mid-80s in London, a company called Lynn Franks, a woman called Lynn Franks, who is still very much around, still very sort of high-profile in the UK and doing all sorts of things. But Lynn at that time was kind of the face of the fashion industry. I mean, if you were going to work in public relations in the fashion industry, Lynn was really the only person to work for. And of course, you might not know this, but it was that PR agency that the comedy Ab Fab was based on down the track.
How brilliant. What a place to work.
It was a pretty wild start to a career when I look back on it. Again, you know, at the time,
Yeah.
I just thought, okay, this is what working life is like. You know, this is my first job. This is what it's like to sort of go to an office every day and earn a salary. And but of course, looking back on it, it was a crazy place to start.
Was it champagne and
No,
parties?
no, 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 it wasn't. It was nothing like AbFab.
Okay.
It was actually very, very, it was hard work.
Yeah.
It was really hard work. We worked incredibly long hours. And, you know, this was back in the days before there was any, you know, internet or computers or anything like that. You know, this was back in the days when if you were mailing out invitations, you stuffed envelopes by hand and wrote the names on the addresses.
Wow.
And then you delivered them. You know, you went off in a taxi or a car or something around London and delivered them. You know, it was different times.
Yeah.
No social media,
Yeah.
no internet. Imagine.
Tough. Well, obviously it did good things for you because that kind of propelled you into this whole kind of creative career that wasn't acting, but it was a whole different world. So you're in PR, then you're doing some styling work. Was that just private work on the side?
No, I did, oh gosh, you're really digging back into my memory now. It was late 80s, I did have a couple of years when I worked freelance as a fashion stylist. Yeah.
Okay.
But sort of between sort of winding up my PR career and starting in the publishing world, I worked as a fashion stylist. And I had some big clients actually, like Marks and Spencer, and a couple of other sort of big English store groups. I used to do all their in-store advertising and point of sale and brochures and all that kind of stuff. And I got to travel a bit too. Caribbean, Miami, Florida. Yeah.
Wow, great for someone at the beginning of their career too.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. Didn't make much money, but I had a good time.
Yeah, well that's what's important, isn't it? And that's feeding the drive and feeding the passion, and then you start maybe thinking about other things you can do. So you were working, as you said, you were doing in-store stuff, and I know that you were working on magazines in Marks and Spencer's and some other places as well.
Yeah, look, I cut my teeth on in-store magazines in the UK. I mean, what we call custom publishing here in Australia, they call contract publishing in England. I spent quite a few years working for a couple of different publishing houses over there in London that produce magazines for clients. So I got to edit the magazine for Marks and Spencer, I got to edit a magazine for IKEA, another one for Debenhams store group. So I mean, they were all great little magazines. They were lifestyle magazines, and we used to produce them beautifully. But you know, ultimately they were produced for a client and for that client's customers.
So the question is, are they jobs that you fell into, or were they, okay, so it wasn't like you was looking to go into that work?
No, this is the thing. I mean, when you look back on my career path, it looks like I must have been incredibly focused and incredibly, you know, selective and everything. But in fact, it wasn't really like that. It was kind of organic.
Yeah.
It would be a bit naive of me to say that I just fell into these jobs, because I didn't. I interviewed for them and I worked hard to get them. But there was no really clearly defined career path there.
So you're just going from interest to interest, basically.
Yeah, my modus operandi really was to just keep working in jobs that I enjoyed. And I was never quite sure where it was taking me.
You like the definition of mindfulness, just living in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't see it like that at the time.
Yeah.
But yes, I guess in a way it was like that. I guess the only career goal I ever had was to come to Australia.
I have heard you say in other interviews that you always thought the Australian lifestyle magazines were the top range, best quality magazines. Was that the reason that you had interest in Australia?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it was twofold. I mean, yes, definitely. Professionally, you know, I used to see all those wonderful Aussie mags like Gourmet Traveller, like Belle, like Vogue Living, like Vogue Entertaining, you know, some of which I've now had the massive good fortune to edit myself. They used to land on my desk over in London, and we did used to look at them and think, wow, you know, they really know how to do mags in Australia. They were the best, and I think they still are the best, you know, 20, 30 years later. So that was a reason why I wanted to come here. But I had visited Australia and fallen in love with it. So there was like an emotional desire to come here, but there was also a professional desire to come here.
I'm always so interested in people that make such drastic geographical changes and stick with them. My partner's Dutch, and he was born in New Zealand but raised over in the Netherlands, and he now lives in Australia, not because of me. He was already living here before I met him because he had that Kiwi passport, of course. But like you, he just kind of always had an interest in Australia and could see himself living there. And I'm someone that I love travelling, and I've been all over the place, and there are so many cities that I've fallen in love with, but I don't know that I could see myself permanently moving my life away from all the people I love and my history and everything. So I'm so interested in that drive, you know. Was it something that you thought was going to be your move for good?
Yes. I think a simple answer to your question would just be yes.
Okay.
I think something in me knew that I would probably live in Australia. But okay, I'll tell you this. I'll make it as quick as I can. I'll try and edit as I go.
Okay.
I came to Australia for the first time in 1983, I think it was. Sorry, not 83, 93. 1993, and I was working for the Marks and Spencer magazine at the time, and I came over here to Sydney with my then art director, and we were on a trip, I think, that was sponsored by Qantas. And we flew into Sydney. I had never been to Australia before. Flew into Sydney, got in quite late at night, and checked into a little hotel, literally, it's funny, just down below where we're sitting now, on Darlinghurst Road, a little hotel called L'Hotel.
Okay.
A little boutique hotel, which was really super cool back in the early 90s. You know, boutique hotels were a new thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, checked into my hotel, and got up the following morning, and anyone listening to this that knows me will laugh at this, because I'm famous for always needing a pharmacy. Wherever I go in the world, the first thing I always need to find is the local pharmacy, because there's always something I've forgotten or something I need. So, running true to form, I got up the following morning, day one, in Darlinghurst, Sydney, looking for a pharmacy. And I came out of the hotel, and I walked down the road in the direction of what is now St Vincent's Hospital, and I just had this overwhelming feeling that I'd been there before. Now, I know that sounds really sort of hippy-dippy and cliched, but I've never felt that feeling since, and I'd never felt it before, but it was just, it's like I knew where I was going. I was in a city that I'd never visited before, had no connection with, but I knew where I was, and I felt totally and utterly at home.
Wow.
Now, fast forward several years, you know, I went back to London, and I stayed working in London for several more years, and I didn't actually make it to Australia until 1999, so 6 years later. And I did move here, and I was living in Sydney. And I had a close friend at the time who was a professional genealogist. This was long before sort of Ancestry.com, and it's like, if you wanted your family tree done, you had to go to a genealogist.
Yeah.
And Benoit, his name was, he did my family tree for me and discovered that in the mid-19th century I had Australian ancestry.
Whoa.
I had Australian ancestry from Sydney. That there was a branch of my family in the 1840s that came out from the UK. There was a guy who came out and stayed in Sydney for something like 30 years, married an Australian woman, then went back to the UK.
Wow. I'm so into stuff like this.
So it kind of all made sense that there was something in my DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you know, I know it all might sound very sort of over-romantic, but I'd never experienced anything like that before, and it was that overwhelming sense that I was in a place that I was meant to be.
Yeah.
And that's how I've remained feeling for 20 years.
Wow. And if you're into things like believing in the universe and everything, I think everything that's happened for you here in Australia proves that point entirely. I think you were definitely meant to be here. You just had success after success, and things are going...
Well, Jana, look, thank you, that's lovely. I mean, but it's not even about success, it's about feeling comfortable. And maybe the success has been as a result of feeling comfortable, because I certainly feel comfortable living in this country in a way that I never felt in the UK. which is weird because that's where I was born, and you
Yeah.
could say that's where my roots are.
Yeah.
But I actually feel that I've put down stronger roots in this country.
Amazing.
Mm.
Well, we're very lucky to have you.
I'm very lucky to be here.
So, okay, you came to Australia. You started. Was your first publishing job here?
Yep.
For, remind me.
Murdoch magazines.
Okay. Yeah.
A lovely guy, Matt Hanbury, who I have a great deal of respect for. Matt gave me my first job and was instrumental in getting me over here. We first met in London, and then he brought me over here. At the time he was running Murdoch magazines, which eventually all got folded into Pacific magazines. But in those days it was Murdoch, it was an independent publishing company, and I came over here to launch a title for Matt. Long story short, it'll take forever to explain all the details. Basically the magazine that he brought me over to edit never actually happened, but by default I ended up editing another magazine called Murray Clare Lifestyle. And here I am 20 years later.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, was there anything that, I mean, you were obviously an editor and working at high levels in publishing for a long time. Were you passionate about the industry, or so was it publishing that you were interested in, or was it the creative stuff around it that was your draw card?
No, it was publishing. I loved magazines. Absolutely. I used to laugh and say I've got ink in my veins. Seriously.
Yeah.
I know that sounds very corny, but it's true. I mean, I'm an old school magazine man, basically. And I started working in magazines a very long time ago when it was a very different culture. But I absolutely never lost that pleasure and satisfaction that comes from seeing a new issue come off the printing press and land on your desk and go into the newsagents. I mean, it was an absolute thrill. And I loved every moment of it, or almost every moment of it. And over a period of years I got to edit some wonderful magazines. I got to launch Delicious magazine here in Australia. I got to edit Vogue Entertaining and Travel and Vogue Living, Belle. Some wonderful titles. I feel like I've been so blessed with the magazine career that I had.
Absolutely. And so were you sad to say goodbye to that when you kind of had these opportunities to put your talents elsewhere in the television realm?
Look, it was kind of bittersweet, but look, I guess there's one thing I have always had in my life which has worked in my favour, and that is a sense of timing. I think I kind of knew that my time in magazines was up, and I don't mean that in a sort of dramatic way. I just, the magazine industry has changed an awful lot. It's a very different industry to the one that I entered, 25, almost 30 years ago, if I count the years in London. It requires different skills, and it requires a different language based around online, digital, social media. That is publishing in 2019. It's not just print and paper. Anyone who thinks that sort of being an editor in 2019 is about producing a print magazine is very naive, because it's not. It's far more than that, and I just felt that there were people out there who were probably better at that than I was. I was very fortunate to have the possibility of a sort of new career in television in front of me. So I felt like I was in a very privileged and very fortunate position, and it felt like the right time to step in that direction. It was like a fork in the road moment. Do I go this way or do I go this way? I thought, well, I've gone down that way. I've loved travelling that path, but now it's time to see what's down that path. Let's turn right instead of left.
And you did that, and you were first hosting a show, or was it judging a show called Homemade?
Oh yes, yes. That's where it all started. I mean, look, for quite a few years, Jana, I was able to juggle publishing and television quite comfortably. So yeah, Homemade. That was 10 years ago, 2009, and that was a show for Channel 9 where I was a judge. That's right. And then that led to The Block a year later, 2010. And again, I was able to continue that role on The Block because basically it was at the weekend. You know, I filmed on Sundays.
Yeah.
So I was able to hold down a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job as well. But that fork in the road that I was just talking about came in 2016 when I was offered the opportunity to co-host a show for Foxtel. And then that was going to be a big commitment.
Yeah.
So that was when I really had to choose, do I go this way or do I go that way?
Yeah, okay. And I want to get to Love It or Listed Australia because I love that show and I've got so many questions which I don't even know if you can answer on air. But I guess what's interesting, I mean, I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the way that, I guess the industry has changed and the way that everyday people have such a broader sense of style and creativity. I feel like it's a new thing that people are really into interiors and designing and stuff, and I feel like maybe the original contestants of the block were still just everyday people just kind of muddling along and doing their best, and now they're so savvy and we're seeing like professional level completions.
Yeah,
you know?
kinda, sorta.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the fabulous thing about reality television, lifestyle television, you know, call it what you will, is that it has got us all excited about our homes. I often liken it to, you know, the MasterChef effect with food.
Yes.
You know, those TV shows came along, and all of a sudden, you know, we're all chefs. It's, you know, it's good and bad.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that it has certainly created a new sense of pride in our homes. Social media has also created a lot of confusion because even though there is so much information out there now, you know, if you look at Instagram, if you look at Pinterest, you know, YouTube, and you know, just all the shows like Love It or Listed, The Block, Selling Houses, people are a little sort of like, how can I put it? Sometimes they're like deer in the headlights. They don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So there is a huge need for people like me, I guess, and people in my profession to still edit and help people cut through all the noise.
Yes.
Because one thing I've found is that even though people are desperately keen to find their style, they don't always know where to look for it.
So true. And I see you see that a lot with Love It or Listed Australia. A lot of people who have probably enormous renovations that need to take place and they just don't even know where to start. And then you come in with the iPad and away you go. This wall's coming down and this is...
The magic of television.
Yes.
No, but the beauty of Love It or Listed is that it is real. It's a genuine dilemma. And I love it because I get to meet real people and help them sort out their problems. And it's not, for me, it's not about interior decoration and design. I mean, you know, the renovations that we do on Love It or Listed are not about giving people the new on-trend colour or the new sort of must-have sofa. It's much more fundamental than that. It's about sorting out their functionality problems. You know, the styling is the icing on the cake. But what these people want more than anything is that extra bedroom or that extra bathroom or a new kitchen or a better floor plan or more room for the kids or something. You know, that's what they want.
Yes.
That's what they want. So it's actually about sorting out their wish list and giving the house functionality. And then the styling is really the last part of the jigsaw puzzle.
Do they get to keep the styling?
Some of it, not all of it. No, I mean, I have to be honest with you that a lot of the stuff is brought in for styling. But they know that. The homes know that.
They get to keep the pillows where the tag gets ripped off, I'm sure.
No, they do. And depending on who the sponsors are.
Yeah, right.
Depending on who the sponsors are for that season, they do get to keep some of it. But, you know, we can always work things out for them. If you know there's something there they love the look of, we can probably get them a mate's rate.
Good to know. The other question I had is, are the budgets really reflective of the work that goes in?
On Love It or Listed?
On Love It or Listed. Because I just think some of the transformations that you're able to do on a seemingly moderate budget are amazing.
No, they genuinely are, because one thing that people sort of don't always understand about Love It or List It is that we really genuinely do spend that couple's budget.
Wow.
I mean, before you can be signed up as homeowners on Love It or List It, you have to have that budget.
Yeah.
Which is why some homes they've got $200,000, sometimes they've only got $120,000. But the budget is real. So the original renovation plans are based on that budget.
Okay.
And then anything else is like icing on the cake,
Yeah.
depending on sponsors. I guess the simple answer to your question is that over the last 3 years we have developed relationships with damn good builders in Brizzy, in Melbourne, here in Sydney, who just really sort of go all out to bring those jobs in on budget.
Yeah.
Occasionally, it's happened in the show, we've had to go back to the homeowners cap in hand and say, look, you've got to do this, it's going to cost you another 10 grand.
Got to re-stump.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that happens, happens. I mean, not everyone has a contingency. So there have been occasions when we've had to do that, where the final sort of tally has come in a bit over budget. But on the whole, we stick as closely as we can to that budget, which is why, you'll hear me say I can't give you everything.
Yeah.
There's always something
Yeah.
that I just can't,
Yes.
on their wish list.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, you can't have that swimming pool that you want. Or, yeah.
The triple
Yeah.
walk-in robe.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's intentional, I'm sure it is, but there always seems to be a female project manager
Yes.
at every site, which I think is a really nice thing to do, considering you've got the 2 male hosts and you and Andrew Winter. And the other thing that I love, and it seems to have really ramped up this season, is the banter between you and Andrew. It really, the narratives that you're both playing is gorgeous and just really nice to... I mean, I know it's not supposed to be nice, but...
It is
cute.
nice. It is nice.
Yeah.
I mean, Andrew and I mean, basically what you see on camera is the way we really are.
Okay.
I mean, if he was in the room now, it would be exactly the same.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a very comfortable relationship with each other. I mean, we're a similar age. I mean, he will tell you, of course, that he's a lot younger than me.
Of course.
But we're a similar vintage. We're both English. We both have a very similar sense of humour, and I think we both have very similar cultural references. And sometimes, we notice that the crew are just standing there sort of scratching their heads like, what are these two talking about? Because we'll go off on some crazy ramble about some show we used to watch in England back in the 70s.
Right.
And we'll start sort of quoting dialogue and all that kind of stuff. I think we respect each other. We don't want to be each other.
Yeah.
So it's not competitive in that way. I respect his real estate knowledge, he respects my interior design knowledge, and we have a bit of fun along the way. And yes, we both want to win, of course we do. But at the end of the day, once they've decided to love or list, we forget it, move on to the next one.
I have to say I'm always disappointed when they decide to list it, because I think...
So am I.
Yeah, I think it's such a shame. It's such a beautiful job and I would always want to stay.
Oh no, look, I totally get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big decision for them, and I think that, look, if my redesign, my renovation has brought them closer to sort of moving forward in their lives, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Whether they decide to love or list, it doesn't matter.
True.
They're moving on in one way or another.
Very good. I'm glad you're not too attached to
No,
each project.
gosh, no.
Very
Gosh,
good.
No.
Now, I know we have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, so what is next for you, Mr. Whitaker?
Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
That's a big question, and do you know what? I don't really know the answer, because even at this advanced stage in my life, I'm still kind of pursuing that organic career path that I was pursuing years ago.
Yeah.
I'm very much take it as it comes. I mean, if the next couple of years remain the same as this year and last year, that's fine. I love what I'm doing. I love making television. I'm very happy. I don't have an awful lot more time to play around with, to be honest with you, because the projects that I have at the moment take up an awful lot of time. I would like to do more television. It's a medium that I enjoy, and I think it's a medium that has huge potential. We're in an era now where content, or visual content, is everything. So I would like to continue to work in that medium, but I'm also very aware that I need to find a bit of work-life balance and spend a bit more time with my partner David down at our beautiful home on the south coast. So you know, I've got to find that balance.
Yes.
But look, I feel in a pretty good place. You know, there's no big challenge that I'm working towards. We'll just see what happens.
Fantastic. Well, I love everything that you're doing, and I'm sure people would be thrilled to keep seeing you on television.
Thank you.
What is the best way for people to get in touch if they'd like to see what you're up to?
To follow me on social media. My Instagram account is probably the best place to start. That's just Instagram at Neale Whitaker. And of course I'm on Facebook too, Neale Whitaker. So that's probably the best place.
Excellent. Well, I will put all of those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining me in this lovely hotel, the Lamont, in
Yes, it is.
Potts Point. And I look forward to seeing what comes next for you.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for having me on The Curious Life. I don't know whether I've had a curious life, actually. I don't know whether I meet those criteria, but it's certainly been a fun one, an interesting one.
Fabulous. Well,
Thanks.
thank you so much, Neale.
Thanks, Yana.
Thank you.